Recovery Sort of is a weekly podcast where we discuss issues around living with addiction from the perspective of two people in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent or endorse the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The views expressed are solely the opinions of its contributors. Be advised there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
All right, welcome to this week's episode of Recovery Sort of. We got Jason here and Billy's here, and we're going to do a little housekeeping first, of course. This week I think we're going to do something a little different and not so much focus on a topic, talk more about just recovery in our lives and in specific and maybe how that applies in general. I do want to point out we are now on Twitter, which is at Recovery Sort of. So you can find us there if you're looking for us. One of the things I've noticed on Twitter so far is that it just seems to be full of alcoholics and many, many less addicts are on there claiming to be addicts at least. And I thought the same thing that might be thought by a lot of people that's stigma still, even though I kind of thought that stigma was gone, but I definitely noticed it. It's overwhelmingly populated with people who claim to be sober that are tweeting, and I even pointed that out, and I got a couple of addicts that responded like, "Hey, I tweet, I'm clean," and all that, and that was great. But I don't know. Do you think that's because of stigma still in 2019?
I definitely do. I mean, I think there's still, at this point, with even in movies and things, you see people talk about, being sober and in, AA and drinking because it's still the same where alcohol is a socially acceptable thing. A lot of people drink. And I think it's easier for people to make the jump to, I can see drinking is fun. I have fun when I go to the beach and drink on the weekends, or I have fun when I go camping and have some beers. And I can see how a person with, limited, control could go overboard. And that makes more sense than what you stereotypically think of an addict, which is like a homeless person, laying in the streets, shooting up with, needles and those kind of things. Right. And so that's a way bigger jump for most,
I can't
everyday people.
Using needles and shooting heroin with dirty water and sucking dick for $5. Like I could understand that. I also consider that maybe just alcoholics, for whatever reason that get sober like Twitter more than addicts do. And I don't know for what that would be. Maybe addicts get into other stuff like porn. I have no idea. Like maybe that's just not the forum for a clean addict on Twitter. Maybe it lends itself more to being a sober alcoholic.
Yeah, and I would have to do some exploration. Like I've never used, Twitter or Facebook or Instagram as like a push for recovery.
Right.
I will reshare some articles and things that I've heard on addiction or things I've listened to or, programs places are doing that I think are interesting. I'll just reshare them. I usually don't comment much, but I don't comment much on social media. I've kind of tried to avoid it the last little while. I have one for the sake of having it, but I don't use it very much.
Right. Yeah. I don't know where that's going to go. I can't stand personally to like self-promote. It just feels so icky on me. But nobody else is ever going to promote this podcast. So I figured I better create a podcast Twitter, and that way I wouldn't feel quite as bad, even though I have yet to post a link to anything. I've just been, conversing with people in the recovery community because they're funny and interesting. So one place we can start today, I just noticing for me that this is a regular theme in my life. 2 weeks ago, I'm in school. I have school classes at night. I have a field placement, which is an internship, if you're not familiar with the terminology, that I go to regularly for 24 hours a week. And I had a job that I was working. And, of course, I have a family at home and hitting a meeting and full life, but I wasn't dreading any of it, right? All of it seemed really cool. I was excited to go to my field placement. I was excited to go to my work. Everything seemed good, right? I was really grateful for it all. I wasn't waking up miserable, like, oh, I got to get out of bed and go to these things. It all felt really positive. And there's been some change over the last couple weeks. I mean, if I wanted to point out changes, the job is on a hold status right now where it's not happening, and so I haven't had that going on. The weather has definitely changed. It's gotten colder over the last couple of weeks. The sun, hours change with the time change. So there has been some slight changes, but I've definitely felt this week. So here I am 2 weeks later, not much has changed in my life. And I'm feeling much less happy with the things that I'm doing. I'm arguing with my wife Friday night. I'm like, why am I so, fluent in mood change at all times, no matter how many steps I've worked, no matter how much spiritual connection I try to work towards? I feel like I just can't stay with one perspective, because if nothing's changed in my life and my feelings change, that's a perspective change probably, right? But what changes it so frequently? Why do my moods and feelings change so vastly when nothing externally does? And that drives me crazy.
Yeah, I've noticed that in my life as well. And I sort of don't think as much about the why a lot of times. Like, I chalk it up to I'm just an addict and that's just the way I am, and everything could be great and I could still be miserable and unhappy and find something to bitch about.
Right.
And then other times, things are a struggle and we're fighting our way through, but it's like all this optimism and hope, and you know what I mean? Like, we're going to get through this and it's going to be good, and and same, I don't know that a lot changes. And I've always just chalked that up to, like, that's part of being an addict. My feelings are all over the place. What they call, like, tissue paper feelings. You know what I mean? It's like
Right.
one or two little things don't go my way, and all of a sudden the sky is falling and life sucks. And and I think, like, I had a similar, like, yesterday I was doing some things around the house. We had some issues come up. We bought this older house and we needed some work. I'm changing a light fixture and I realized the electric's deteriorating behind the walls. And of course, immediately that turns into this emergency where I got to rip all the electric out of the house and replace all the wiring. And so it's an older house that needs work. And I'm doing that, and I'm trying to take care of the dog because my wife's out of town. So I'm trying to take care of the dog and the kids and the house, and, dishes are piling up and things are, not going like I want them to go. And
Right.
immediately I'm like, I can't fucking do this anymore. I'm done with this. I'm out. Like, I'm done. I can't do it.
Right.
And, I sit down and I take a breath and I sort of think about it for a minute and kind of laugh. Like, I laugh. Like, where the fuck do I think I'm going? And what do I think I'm doing? You know what I mean? Like, I could walk away from all of it, and really, if I wanted to, and that's fine. But I don't think that would make me happy,
No, not at all. Yeah, so I guess I look at some of the stuff that happened earlier on in my recovery, and before, I did seek some outside help through therapy, and I look at the stuff that happened before that, and I say, okay, I felt maybe weak and helpless as a kid, but then I got in recovery and I started going to the gym and I started taking all these supplements, and I got to be a larger guy, right? But I would still wake up and look in the mirror, and one day, Monday, I look in the mirror and I'm like, God damn, look how big I am. I'm jacked, right? And then Tuesday I wake up and I'm the same size, and I'm like, I feel like such a small, tiny human, right? And so that I could understand, and therapy helped with some of the negative talk and low self-esteem. But I guess I just get frustrated now because it's like the smallest things, when I get in this mode, it's like half depression and just everything seems gloomy and there's like a cloud over my head a little bit. And the smallest things seem like such a huge inconvenience. But the hoodie I wear, I like to pull the sleeves up to the elbow, but then when I pull them back down, they're too loose, right? And my vape batteries aren't lasting long enough. And it just all seems like the end of the world to me. And I'm like, God, I hate that. Like, everything was so great 2 weeks ago. why can't I just stay there always?
Yeah. Have you tried doing, the weird sort of uh positive reinforcement, like the gratitude lists and stuff like that when you get into those modes? Have you ever?
Yeah, I definitely. And so one of the things I am thankful for is that when I get in these modes today, it's not. I don't feed the doom and gloom, right? Like I know it's there, and I catch myself in it. And what I generally do for me, I end up talking to God a lot more. Like, hey, God, like I don't like this. What's up, right? Can we do something about it? Am I supposed to sit here in it? In my argument with my wife, which look, I'm never proud of half of the stuff I say in the argument, but I did catch myself, and she'll probably never know the difference. I did catch myself pulling back a couple times because it was a text message argument. And so I found what I wanted to say, and I was like, no, be softer, be gentler. And it still wasn't pretty, right? But there were moments of like some clarity and sanity in it where it was like, you don't want to say those things at all. I'm not even sure why I'm arguing half the time. I'm just arguing because now we're here and that's what we're doing. I do try to keep a gratitude list. It's just very hard when these moments happen to feel the gratitude, even when I do the thoughts, the active thinking of, hey, it's not that bad. I really know it's not. It hasn't changed much from 2 weeks ago. Like I know this intellectually. I know I'm happy to have this family of mine. I know I'm happy for my kids. It doesn't seem to change the feeling very much when I do that.
Yeah, and I don't know that we get to change our feelings.
Right.
We feel what we feel. Like that's kind of always the way it's been explained to me. Like, and trying to change my feelings a lot of the times is what led me to addiction or leads me to other vices because, hey, I don't like the way I'm feeling, but, pornography or spending money or,
Right.
some other woman, like those things will make me feel better. And they might in the moment, but it's that instant gratification.
Mhm.
Seeking that kind of gratification has always led me down a dark hole, down a dark path.
Right.
Sometimes I think it is just healthy to sit and say, hey, this is how I feel. And that's okay. Every day isn't going to be great. Everyone's not happy all the time at every moment. In addiction, I think I thought that's what it was supposed to be. Like every day is supposed to be great and I'm supposed to be happy all the time. And that's just not reality. I don't think that's reality for normal people. Hate to speak for
Right.
normal people out there because I'm totally not one of them. But yeah, I don't think we just get to feel good all the time. Everybody gets a turn, whether it's by choice or just by feeling.
Right. No, I still probably do from time to time fall into the trap of like, wanting to walk outside my door and have a rainbow end on my house and, butterflies flying around my face and which would actually probably be really annoying. Now that I think about it, but
Right.
it sounds fancy. And it's funny because I sit in my field placement I did this yesterday with an individual in a therapy session and told him, hey, it's all right, whatever you feel, like just feel it. It's okay. And then I can't seem to always do that myself, even when I feel it. Um, Not to switch too far off topics, but my daughters, so they're 14 now, and then a lot of their life is about their friends, not so much, mom and dad or family or any of that. They're not as overly concerned with that. They spend a lot of time on their phones, on whatever video calling system they're using at the moment, which drives me fucking crazy because I don't know. I get that it's a generational divide. Like I barely want to talk on the phone. I definitely don't want you to fucking look at me when I'm not, I get presentable to go out of the house. When I'm at the house, I look like a wreck probably, or
Right.
I just don't want to look at you. I want to be able to pick my nose if I want to. Like the point is that I'm alone and not bothered by that. And they spend their entire day walking around the house with their phone in front of them, looking at people and being looked at. And I just think it's so fucking disturbing to me. And along with it, the fact that it's always on speakerphone. It's like I feel like I'm constantly, if I walk in their room to say something to them, I have no warning that I'm also talking to, people outside of my house at the same time. I can hear their fucking friends in my room because their speakerphone's so loud. They leave their friends on hold on video call and walk away for half an hour and come back. I'm like, what fucking dumb stuff is this? And now every weekend they want to go somewhere with a friend. And I don't know if it's me or them, I am always annoyed by it. My initial reaction every time they ask to go do anything with a friend is, fuck no. Right? Like, no, that sounds like an inconvenience. It's probably terrible. Your friends are probably awful for you and leading you down a path of disaster. I hate the idea. Just fucking stay here and be with your family.
Huh.
Even though when they're at home, they don't actually hang out with the family, right? They're in their room on the fucking phone anyway. So I don't know what that is about me, but that is always my initial take on it is that's a terrible idea.
Wow. Yeah, I'm almost the other way. I don't want to say I like my kids to go away, but I think it's good. My kids have a little different they don't go to public school, so they don't have the normal, quote unquote normal peer groups that you have in
Right.
public school and things like that. But they have friends and they do things and go out and are involved in different activities. And I've always encouraged them to seek outside people. I've encouraged them to bring their friends to our house so we meet them, because I
Right.
feel like I get a pretty good sense of people. Obviously, I mean, kids are going to hide stuff and they're going to be sneaky and you're not going to know everything. But it's, for me, growing up, I think the secrecy from my parents was a lot of what allowed me to continue to use at a young age. So with my kids, I really just push honesty and openness. Hey, where are you going? Where are you going to be? How do I get a hold of you if I need to get a hold of you? Those
Right.
kind of things. And then I just let them go and try to trust that I've instilled in them the right values to take out into the world. And then as far as the inconvenience to me, I'm just honest with them. If I'm around doing nothing, I'll give them a ride somewhere. I don't mind at all. But if I'm busy, I can't. And they'll have to, if you want to go, that's fine. You got to figure out logistics and finances, like, oh, am I supposed to give you money? Well, then what are you doing to earn the money?
Right.
You need to get somewhere, I might be able to take you, I might not. So I do put some of that responsibility on them. Like, we try to work that out. My kids are actually probably more organized than my wife and I when it comes to most things. Like we have one of those calendars on the side of the fridge with all the days of the months on it. And like my daughter's really good at going in and like marking down the days that she works each week and putting, what's going on. And we put activities and stuff on there. And probably 90% of the stuff on there is what the kids wrote on there themselves, not what her and I wrote on there. We just forget things.
Right.
So I've recognized like that's important to them. So I try to do that for them so that we can all coordinate. So that if they want to go somewhere or be somewhere, we can make that happen for them.
I think a lot of, the work that still needs to be done for me in recovery is, still on some levels letting go of that control, thinking I know better who their friends should be than they do. And I haven't, look, not that any of their friends are terrible, right? I haven't seen any awfulness happen right in front of my eyes. I have had a lot of their friends over because I agree. I want to meet people before, I go sending my kids out in the world with them and get an idea for myself. But I definitely think I question their decision-making skills for sure. And some of that I think is warranted because they're 14 and 14-year-olds by nature are idiots, right? But some of it might be excessive and I could use to work on some of that, letting go and understanding like I don't ultimately have control. No matter what I do, I could put them in a padded bubble the rest of their life and they could find a way to suffocate or something. Like I can't save them from themselves. I can't save them from the world. I'm not that powerful.
Yeah. And I've always sort of taken the notion with my kids that, the more you tell them they can't do or they're not allowed to do, the more it sort of pushes them to want to do it anyway.
Right.
So I'd rather it be open and honest. I mean, so I guess I'm allowed to say this. I don't know. 5 people listen to this, so who really cares? But, my daughter at 16, we found out she had a boyfriend and they were sexually active.
Right.
And as a dad, you never want to hear that. You don't want to,
Right.
you don't want to know that. I mean, it's terrible. But we had an honest conversation and we took and got her on birth control. And she takes birth control and we try to support her in that. And I'm sure people will be like, oh, you support your daughter having sex? Well, no, not really. But I don't support her raising a kid at 16, 17 years old either. And as much as I cannot want that to be the reality, I don't think telling her to stop is really going to make her stop.
Right.
And I have always kind of jokingly but half seriously said, like, if I ever found out they were really bad into drugs, like heroin or anything really bad, really hooked on drugs, that I would chain them to a bed in their room and lock the door and keep them in there for as long as I could. I have kind of said that.
Right.
And I don't know that I wouldn't, but they're going to experience life, whether I like it or not. And it's not always on my timetable. And for me personally, like, I just look at my childhood. I mean, I was sexually active at 14 and getting into legal trouble at 15, 16. By the time I started driving, I'd already been driving. I had stolen cars and was driving before I even had a license.
Right.
And so, I'd like my kids to be at least a little bit open with us about what's going on. At least then we can see, hopefully together, see where they make bad choices and then talk about those bad choices and work through them. Because we're all going to make bad choices. We're growing up. Like, that's part of growing up, is like learning to live and experience life and make some mistakes. And, we don't put it like my 17-year-old. My wife does, and I try to get her to back off a little bit. It's like, she's getting to the age where she's going to graduate soon, and what she want to do for college, and what do we want to do, going forward in her life. And my wife's kind of pushing her a little bit to start making some decisions about, well, what do you want to do for a career, and what do you want to do? And I heard a guy say one time, and it stuck with me pretty well. He said, so as a 35 or 40-year-old person, would you ever go to a 17-year-old and take career advice? Like, you would never go to them and say, hey, what would be good decisions for me to make for my career? So why do we in turn put that on them and go, oh, at 17, you need to start making good decisions about what you want to do with the rest of your life?
Right.
Like, no, they're not experienced or capable enough to make those decisions. So why are we letting them go out and sign up for these 4-year colleges and take out these student loans and do all these things that are basically making their career decisions for them for the rest of their life? Like, it's crazy. I mean, it's just not practical. So, I want to just support my kids in experiencing life, exploring things they like, exploring what they want to do, figuring out who they are now, why they have the supports of their parents, why they have a roof over their head and a place to live and, people to take care of them, because I don't plan on taking care of them forever. At a certain age, I'm going to expect, and they know it, they have some personal responsibilities. But I can look at it now as this is my opportunity to help them learn to make those decisions.
Right. I think a lot of my stuff is definitely based in fear. So fear doesn't control my life the way it used to. It doesn't call all the shots, but it's, ever more present when I'm aware of what's going on with me. And when I'm in tune, I see that it's affecting me. I'm worried about their decision making. I'm scared of, the activities that they find themselves into, which is basically fucking nothing, right? Like, their generation is just on their phone all day, all the time that you let them be. And so we had like some time restrictions on their phone, and there was a lot of animosity about that in the house, that we had to, they were cheating the system, and so we were punishing them, and this, that, and the other. They had workarounds for how to get around it. And so we made a new agreement where we took that off, but their chore had to be done every day, on time, and this, that, and the other, and some other things. And it's like a very low tolerance policy with that. Like, if your chore is not done, well, then you don't have a phone, right? Like, it's done. It's not a question anymore. It's not you're going to do it tomorrow. But yeah, a lot of my fear does stem from that, and more about, what you said. I mean, policy and laws and social norms don't generally seem to match up with research, right? Like, research says, hey, people aren't really fully developed in their brain to make good long-term decisions about consequential thinking until 25. But let's do all this shit before then, right?
Right.
You can't make good consequential decision making until you're 25, but go ahead and vote for the fucking president that's going to run the country at 18, right? Go ahead and drink at 21 and make good decisions there. Like, none of that makes sense. Go ahead and figure out what your career path is by 22 and
what you even like to do.
Exactly. I mean, I went to school at 32. That's when I started college, or 33, somewhere in that range. And like, I still didn't know what the fuck I wanted to do. So how does a 18-year-old figure all that out when they aren't even fully developed in their brain?
Right. And not only that, but sign, student loans and take on all this debt that's,
Right.
Probably more than their first house is going to cost.
Yeah.
They're doing that at 17. They wouldn't let them go out and buy a house at that age, but they'll let them acquire that much student debt,
Exactly.
which really has no intrinsic value. I mean, I don't know if intrinsic value is right, where it has no monetary value, because they could go to school and not do well, or go and take classes and get a degree and then not even work in that field. Like it's a weird thing.
And that's, so when I met my wife, she had a lot of student loans because she had a degree, and I hadn't even thought about going to college at that point. But her payment plan was a 30-year payment plan to repay it, right? And it was like $400 a month at that point in time. And just looking at that, I said, well, that's like $50,000 less of a house we could ever afford over 30 years. That $400 a month that we could be putting into a $250,000 house. Now we have to buy a $200,000 house because we can't afford that $400 a month. And I'm like, why the fuck do we have 30-year mortgages for a career? That's crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts. But yeah, I mean, it's the old saying, like, if parenting, there's no book on perfect parenting, and there's no sort of right way to do it. I mean, I guess I've always looked at it as I am raising a bunch of unique and wonderful individuals. I've been entrusted to the care of these individual beings, and I want to guide and nurture and try as best I can to support them to be the best versions of themselves that they can be. My kids, they've all been raised in the same house with the same parents. I have 3 completely different kids as far as personality, responsibility. I have one daughter who's incredibly responsible, cleans her room all the time, helps with dishes, takes care of her laundry, is very organized. And then my son is all over the place, and his room's a mess, and there's constantly dishes, and there's a constant fight to, take a shower and get ready for school on time. And, then my older daughter is kind of right in the middle there. She's neither of the two. And I believe our parenting's been the same with all of them.
Right.
But their personalities, their interests, their, whatever is, they're unique individuals. And so, I want to just be as honest and open and nurturing with them about life and the world and the different things. I mean, we talk about with our kids with drugs. Like, I imagine at some point, they all tell me they never have, which is amazing to me. But we talk about drugs or drinking alcohol or things like that. And, we've always been pretty open. They know my wife and I are in recovery. They've heard us talk about recovery and addiction, and, they know a lot about it. They've been around a lot of things. They've asked us lots of questions about it at different times. And we've always tried to just be honest with them about, like, hey, you may try this at some point in your life. It's not, and of course, most of the time now, thank God, they're like, no way, I'm never doing that, which, hey, great. I got no problem with that either.
Right.
But the truth is, for most adults, they can grow up and drink alcohol and be fine. And they don't turn into raging alcoholics and, addicts. So we just try to approach it that way. Like, look, you may get into situations where you're going to do these things, or you're going to try them. And that's not bad. I'm not here to place moral judgments on people who drink or smoke pot or whatever. But you need to be aware of what the warning signs are, and when you feel like you're going down a bad path, and what the consequences start to look like when you're having a problem, and address it early on. Don't let it get to some extreme place. Me growing up I used around a whole bunch of other people that were addicts. So I didn't realize how bad the behavior was, or how extreme what I was doing was, because my peer group at the time was all using, drinking, and the same way,
Right.
I mean, when it got to the point that we were stealing and robbing and shit, that was, you knew that was a problem. But, in my social group, that was acceptable.
Right. Yeah, you make a lot of good points there. One of the most helpful things in my parenting was definitely, I started off with twins. And I had this belief that as a parent, I was going to, guide and nurture them right into the right way of doing things. And so early on, watching these twins develop, knowing that like whether my parenting style changed for a younger sibling of theirs or not, they got the same exact fucking thing, right? From day one, they got the same parenting, and they are two completely different fucking people. And so that really allowed me to like step back and take a look at my parenting and say, I don't need to be this overly insane, strict parent, because it's obviously not working that way that I thought it would. I'm not producing these little people that are directly in tune with what I believe in and how to act. And all those things about like parents feeling shameful when their kids act up in public or when their kids behave bad as if it's a reflection on them. Like raising twins eliminated all of that for me, because I'm like, I have so little to do with it. I gave these two the same thing and they had completely different experiences and outcomes from it. So obviously what I'm doing is only minimally affecting their lives, as children of mine. And it allowed me to step back and say, you know what, maybe I just need to take a softer path of parenting for one, and reevaluate this whole idea, because kids come out, they like you said, they're their own unique little pieces of nature, man. They have very little to do with what I'm doing. I'm not saying they don't pick up on some stuff. I'm not saying I can't traumatize them or give them lifelong complexes, because I surely can, but I don't have as much input into their final product as I originally thought I would, now that I've had that experience. But yeah, I do. I try to guide them and not be the dictator and not be that. And I definitely don't do it perfect by any means. I have my better times and worse times. 2 weeks ago, I was probably a better parent when I was, in this great happy spot of gratitude than I would be today. But I definitely struggle with just concern over their outcome, concern that I'm not doing it well enough, of course, concern that I don't know how to do it well, concern that I have these gut instinctual reactions to say no to things that I don't have any good reason to say no to. And I'm like, where does that shit come from? Why do I just want to keep them from the world and hide them away or something? I don't know. I try to be pretty open with them, especially the older kids of mine know my history to some extent. I haven't hidden things from them. I don't try to pretend I'm perfect. I try to have conversations that, inspire them to come to me when they really have problems and not overreact when they do some things, so that they feel like they can come back. But parenting is definitely probably the biggest challenge I've faced in recovery, trying to do it well, and, all the self-centeredness of mine and thinking I know the right answers, and the ego and the, kids are gonna lie, not out of a disrespect to me, but just out of avoiding trouble, and understanding that and not taking that personally. And then all coming back to, self-will versus God's will at some point of like, am I living in tune with spiritual principles here, or am I just trying to enforce what I want to happen in my life, what makes my life easiest and feel best?
Yeah. Well, I heard recently, I was listening to a audiobook, and they were talking about, and I don't remember the scientist's name, but they did all these studies on families and what, made happy families versus unhappy families, or healthy families versus unhealthy families. And sort of his summation, if you will, of that process was, happy families, there isn't one thing that all families that are happy do that makes them happy and healthy. There's a lot of things that you got to try to not get wrong. So there's, you can't just do, which is why it's so hard to have a happy, healthy family,
Right. There's no formula.
Right. There's no, I can just do this one thing and everything will be great. It's nope. You got to get like these 10 different things. They got to be fed. They got to be clothed. Their, needs need to be met. But then there's emotional needs and physical needs. And then those change within kids. Right. The emotional needs of my children are all different. My son is a very emotional kid, very reactive to his feelings, real high highs, real low lows, overreacts to movies, he'll cry at movies and stuff like that. And my daughters don't seem to be that way. So instead of trying to parent that out of him, I've just grown to try to nurture that. Like that's just a part of who he is.
Right.
So I have to take a little bit of different approach sometimes to him than I would take with my daughters. That's been hard, because like I say, you feel like you want to do, if I just do these same things, it's going to work. Well, not necessarily. What works for one doesn't work for the other.
Yeah.
So my wife tends to be sort of what I'll call pessimistic about the world, and I am more optimistic about the world. I am more encouraging of them to like, man, there is a lot of amazing, wonderful, beautiful people, beautiful places, beautiful things to do in the world. There's so many things to go see and do and explore and experience. This country is beautiful. If you ever have a chance to travel across the country, it's an amazing place, beautiful. There's mountains and valleys and canyons and, forests and desert lands and, it's just oceans and beaches. Just, we've had the great experience of seeing a lot of those things. And like, I've tried to instill in my kids, like, hey, as you get older, you don't have to stay here in Maryland. You can go wherever you want in this world. You're not limited to this little geographic region. You should go wherever makes you happy, wherever you feel at peace and that you love. And now for some different weird reasons, my wife and I are kind of locked here into Maryland. But that's by choice, not necessarily, but we have some obligations to stay here. But we have, tried to teach them, like at least I have tried to teach them to explore the world and see what's out there. And my wife is very much the opposite. She's very fearful. She's sort of, it's dangerous. You got to really be careful. You got to, watch who you talk to and who you're around. And I don't live that way. So I'm like, I see the crazy people walking down the streets. I live in a kind of not so great neighborhood, and there's prostitutes and drug addicts all around, and I see them and I just, hey, how's it going today? And I talk to them and wave, and I don't turn my back and run. It hasn't caused me any harm yet. I can't say that it won't, but I don't know that living in fear reduces your risk of harm anymore.
Absolutely not. And I waffle from side to side with that a lot of times. I definitely can live in the fear side of it and the aspect of it, and the pessimistic aspect. I mean, my father was probably, maybe one of the greatest pessimists in history. I'm not sure. It seemed like it, but just looking at the state of the world and like the things. So I love when I see my kids that are overly emotional, and I try to nurture those types of things too, right? So for me as a kid, I felt overly emotional, and I feel like I was always judged for it and tried to, correct it because it was something wrong with me. And I believe part of that is what maybe not led me astray, but it definitely contributed to my feelings of not feeling right, not feeling a part of the world. And I feel like getting in touch with that later on in life, that overly emotional side of me, has kind of led me into the therapeutic community of wanting to work in that environment, the love and care for people that I do feel. So I wish that would have been nurtured in me. But at the same time, when I see things in my kids, like I want to combat the world, right? Like the world has this message. The US has this message that it sends. Society gives them, hey, buy stuff. Hey, love beautiful people. Hey, all these terrible messages that I fucking hate, right? And I try to combat that. I don't want to nurture that part, right? But that's what I see that everybody's caught up in, my kids included. It's like, oh man, I gotta watch these streamers. They're important, Ninja matters. And I'm like, he's a fucking dude that lives next door to somebody. Like, he's no different than your next door neighbor, right? These celebrities, Kylie Jenner, whoever the hell, they're not important. They're just people, right? Not that they're not important, but they're no more important than the guy who lives next door or across the street, right? And that's the message I try to send. And so I get pessimistic about if these kids are being raised by somebody who gives a fuck, and they're turning out still buying into the messages of society and all these things that I consider not that great or wonderful, consumerism and beauty and all these concepts, right? You're useless after the age of 22 because you're just getting old now and all that. If they're being raised by a conscientious person who cares and still turning out that way, then the world's fucked, because a lot of people aren't even in tune with that stuff even existing. They're just Amazon shopping every day and loving it, and not even aware that it might not be the greatest habit. And their kids are all going to obviously love that stuff. And so fuck it. We're going to elect, Donald Trump for the next 80 years as president. We'll change the rules and we're all just going to go to hell. Like, I don't know. Like so it's hard to be optimistic about that.
Well, here's the optimistic take on that, because I have one for you. So how many times have you been, I'm going to tie this back into some recovery stuff. So how many times have you been in meetings and you hear somebody say some shit that sounds great, some guy with a bunch of years clean, and he says some saying and you think, oh, that sounds wonderful. And you walk out of the room and you totally forget about it. You don't even think about it. And then years later, as you're going through life and some situation comes up, that thing pops in your head and you go, oh, that's what that means. That's what they're talking about when they say that, and that's because those values and lessons were given to you. You just weren't ready for them yet. So as parents, I believe there's a lot of that going on. I'm putting the information there. I'm giving examples. I'm trying to put these things in their head. You know what I mean? Right. And when the time comes, hopefully that'll be what they recall. Or as they have bad experiences, they'll go, oh yeah, I was warned about this and I didn't listen, but I have information there to combat that. So hopefully as parents, we just keep trying to instill the good values, and at the end of the day, those good values will win out.
The seed has been planted.
Yeah. And as far as recovery, like we've taken a lot of, and my wife taught me this early on, like a lot of those principles that we learned through actually more the traditions than the steps, but a lot of those, so in recovery, you hear a lot of times, the steps are so I don't kill myself and the traditions are so I don't kill other people, that kind of saying. And we've taken that kind of a step further. Of a lot of those are the principles that I want to raise my family in, you tweak them a little bit to try to make them fit, but the principles are the same, the tradition would be our common welfare should come first, recovery depends on unity. Well, in our family happiness comes first, and that depends on family unity. How do we work as a family together? How do we talk to each other, see what each other's needs and goals and desires are? And then how do we make that happen for each person? Because we all, 5 of us have different goals, different desires, different things we want to do, different places we want to go. And so as a parent, it's easy to say, well, I know best. I know what you need, and I know what'll make you happy, and I know what you want to do. And I think I'm really smart. I know I'm smarter than them, so I should just make all the decisions, and then everything will be great. But sometimes allowing them to be involved in the decision making and doing what they want to do versus what I want to do, is there's more power in that than there is in being right. And I forget that sometimes. I get it wrong a lot, and was thinking yesterday dealing with all that electric stuff at the house, I was really critically aware of how far I've come in recovery with stuff like that. So as a obsessive compulsive person at times in my history of working on house projects or getting, whether it was mow the grass or take care of this or that outside or fix some major thing, the water heater's broke, whatever it is, whatever project I'm working on. In the past, especially when my kids were a lot younger, I was really locked and focused into getting that thing done, whatever it was that I needed to do. Say it's the water heater. Well, we all need hot water. It's for the good of the family. It's the most important thing. And I get locked in tunnel vision, and this is what I'm doing. And so then when the kids, want food or they're fighting with each other and whatever, all those little distractions of addressing their wants and needs, I would flip out. You know what I mean? And get angry and start yelling and freaking out because I can't do what I want to do or need to do in that moment. And some of that's, my own weird stuff. I'm more goal oriented. So if I can focus on a task, complete it to completion, see the finished project, I get personal satisfaction out of that.
Right.
Handling my kids' emotional needs or wants or demands, like that's just never ending. There's no winning in that. It's just you handle this and then the next thing comes up and the next thing comes
Never
up.
ending, and the payoff doesn't show till later.
Yeah, they really feel ungrateful a lot of the time. So, in the past, that's really caused me some personal angst that I didn't recognize until the end of the day. At the end of the day, well, the water heater's in, but now I feel like shit because I yelled at my kids 5 times and I made them feel bad about being hungry, or
Right.
being in an argument with each other when they're 7 and 5, like just being normal life. And so yesterday I'm working on all this electrical stuff and I kept having to take breaks to deal with, making sure the dog gets outside and making sure the kids have lunch. And, my son wanted to go to this thing, so I had to get him some money. And, my daughter was going to babysit, so I had to make sure, I was home in time for this and that. And just trying to be present in their lives and be available to them as the priority over the project of the electric as the priority. Like that's an improvement that, through recovery, I've learned to look at, when I do this, it makes me feel bad. I feel guilty or bad, so maybe we need to change that behavior because that guilt, shame, and embarrassment and those things are usually an indicator to me that I'm not doing something right.
Yeah. And, you remind me of one of the things, as you say, that the guilt over time helps you to remember to refocus and reframe and figure out your issues, reminding me of some of the hope of recovery that I kind of believe the good analogy of the road getting more narrow the longer I stay clean and the further into recovery I go. Meaning, when I got here, it was like, hey, I'm not shooting heroin and cocaine today. Awesome. It doesn't matter what else I do, right? I can go steal. I can, cheat on my girlfriend with 5 other women and lie to all of them about wanting to be with them. And none of that matters. It's all good. I'm not high today, right? And then over time, some of those behaviors start becoming less acceptable to me. And so to realize that and remember that often when I'm facing these life crisis in recovery nowadays, it's very, very different from that first day of recovery, right? It's things like, man, I might have had an attitude when I talked to my daughter earlier and I don't feel so great about it, right? Pretty minor in the grand scheme of things. Definitely, if that would have been my problem when I had a year clean, I'd have been like, I'm great, right? But the road has gotten narrower. And now the smaller things do affect me and they affect me sooner. And there's much more positive going on so that these minor inconveniences or adjustments that need to be made are taken care of much sooner when they start than they were in the past. It's not a 3-month venture down a line of self-centeredness. It's like, oh man, I feel crappy the last few days a little bit. Maybe I should readjust, right? And that is a lot of hope. Like my life probably is, it's never the way I feel about how I'm doing isn't really indicative of how I'm doing, right? How I'm doing and how I'm feeling are 2 completely separate ideas. And I need to often look at how I'm doing when I'm not feeling so great. Maybe I'm not doing all that great either and I need to adjust, but maybe it's just that I'm just not feeling that great and I'm still doing pretty well. And that's a hopeful way to think too.
So this is a weird thing we've done, and it's again another one of those sort of things you hear in recovery, but we have actually, and it's hard to say whether you'll get a straight answer or not, but we have actually sat down with our kids at times and said, how do you think we're doing as parents? Are there things that you think we could do better? Are there things that we could do more of?
Right.
Are there things that, we do really well? And listen to what they have to say without judgment. Now, the
Right.
judgment part's hard because it'll hurt your feelings. But we've done that with our kids at different times, and it's awkward. It's
Yeah.
uncomfortable. But other skills that I've learned in recovery wise that have helped me in parenting is just listening sometimes, just sitting down, letting my kids talk, letting them get out whatever frustrations or whatever they have to say. A lot of times with me, I counter that with their arguments with logic, which is difficult, but allowing them to have a feeling that, I'm here to listen. I don't
Right.
always agree, and I'll tell them that. Well, I don't agree with that, or I don't see it that way, or that's not how we do things here. Like those things come out sometimes. But there are times where I'm like, well, I see your point. I understand what you're saying, and I'm sorry, whatever. Um, the other thing I heard, and it was the same audiobook where the guy was talking about the family studies and things like that. They said, as parents, we need to give ourselves a break. Like, we are going to make mistakes. We are going to do, whatever bad things as parents at times. A lot of times, the best thing we can do is go to our kids and just apologize, and not give a bunch of excuses on why we made a mistake, but just go to them and say, hey, look, I did this. I'm really sorry. That's not the kind of parent I want to be. And leaving it go. And just admitting, like, hey, I make mistakes. I'm not perfect. It's okay. I'm trying to own up to it. Yesterday, my son and I were in an argument, and, I yelled at him maybe a little more than he needed to. It was about cleaning his room, of course. We've been asking him nicely to clean his room. And he hasn't done it. So yesterday was all right, well, now we're turning off the internet, which turned into a big fight. And then I'm yelling at him, and he didn't feel like, oh, so now it's just okay to yell at me whenever you're mad at me and all this stuff. And of course, my logic at the time was, look, I've tried to be nice. I've tried to ask you nicely. I've given you a whole weekend to do. I gave you all last weekend to do it at your own pace, at your own time. I kept making suggestions. I kept trying to be nice. That hasn't worked for me. So now I'm going to try this. And we'll say if yelling and consequences gets it done. And Unfortunately, guess what? It got it done.
Ugh.
And so I just told him flat out. I said, I'm going to do what I need to do to get this done. They're at the time, and they're not major, but they are. Like, there's health issues there. He's got dirty dishes and stuff in his room. I don't want bugs in the house. I don't want ants and bugs in the house and mold growing on dishes in his bedroom. Like, that's unhealthy, and we're not going to have that in the house. And learning when to kind of crack down a little bit is that tough line. But so I will say I was a little loud at times, but I really am careful now not to insult or degrade them, which are things I've done in the past. Things like, what are you, stupid, or quit being an idiot, saying those kind of things. Because that's the way I was raised. I was talked down to a lot. Which probably has to do with my self-esteem issues. But so that's what comes out naturally a lot of times. But you learn, hey, well, how did that make you feel? How was that? So yeah, there are times that I'll yell or be a little more assertive as a parent, that I can do that in a way that's not degrading or belittling to him, or them. I don't yell at my daughters too much. They're pretty good. We've gotten beyond that. They've realized arguing and yelling doesn't really accomplish much. We got goals to achieve. Let's see how we need to get there. We can work together and do it, or we can work against each other. But at the end of the day, there is a sort of underlying, like, it's my house. I'm in charge. These are kind of the rules. I'll listen to you if you want to talk about some of them. Some of them are negotiable at different times. But in general, we have a standard, a quality of life that we want to maintain in our household. And you have an obligation and responsibility to uphold that with clean dishes and cleaning up and picking up after yourselves and vacuuming your room and vacuuming after the dog and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm with you on not stigmatizing, not labeling my kids. I try to do that to the best of my ability, and I'm sure I fall short, but instead of like calling them a liar, I say they told a lie and things along that nature. And I know it seems like a small distinction, but I think it's important, right? Your nature is not to be a liar. You said something that was untrue because you were trying to avoid being in trouble, right? And I want to understand that and try to remember to frame it that way when I'm talking to them, so that I don't paint this portrait of them being a terrible person. They're a person who made a decision that maybe I don't agree with. And I think saying that helps them, and I think saying it like that also helps me to remember that. It's funny you brought up the time for the kids to have a voice, and I found that to be very important, and I did that for a while. We would sit around and we had like a judgment-free, vent space, basically, where you could say whatever you felt like you needed to say to people, including adults, and there would supposedly be no judgment about it, and we could air it out and maybe talk about it, maybe just air it out. And it went okay. I think we did it a few times at one point, and the kids were a little iffy about what they could really say. You know what I mean? They were still like, can I really call you a jerk or whatever? I do remember, and I'm sure my wife, who was probably my only listener, will remember this differently. She seemed to struggle keeping the judgment-free part out of it a little bit. It seemed like when the kids would criticize her, she took it personal, which is very natural, right? I'm not trying to say it was easy to sit there and hear criticisms. I did feel like at the time we did it, they were a little younger and maybe there wasn't a whole lot of valuable input to take from it for us as parents. It was like, oh, well, you don't let us play on the Xbox enough or something, that really seemed small and ridiculous at the time. But I do think that might be a valuable thing to try to put back into place, which would lead me into my next issue, which was what my argument was about the other night, is just feeling like I don't have enough time with my family. I was working and in a field placement, and now even with the job on hold, there's still a limited amount of time to be home. There's definitely a limited amount of time to be home by the time my wife gets home from her job, where we're all there. And there's things that need to be accomplished, and people have their own agenda of what they really want to do. But along with that, we sign them up for activities. And sports. And I bring this up because I know you are somewhat on the other side of the opinion of this. And so that might be useful for me to hear that from another place. I think it's too much, right? I miss the concept of the 1950s when there was not really organized kids sports. Like you went out into your front street and there was 18 kids out there and you all walked down the park and played a game of baseball together. And that was great. I think I like the concept of team sports and organized sports. It's nice, it gives them some team building and everything. But so I have 5 kids, right? 4 of them are of sport playing age. And so when you put 4 kids into a sport, that's a lot of your week, right? Practices, games, you got to be at fields like for sometimes 5 to 8 hours on a Saturday. It's overwhelming for me to think that much of my life that I'm trying to spend with my family is spent sitting at a field. And not that I don't enjoy watching some of the games, but it's still a very long time to be there. And then when you start talking about some of these 4 kids having 2 sports in a season, and then you talk about doing 4 sport seasons, and some are doing 2, and now my wife's even mentioning she don't want to hold 1 kid back and they want to do 3 sports in a season. And I'm like, what the fuck, right? When is enough? When is this too goddamn much? And so we have arguments about that. And look, I'm scared I'm wrong, right? I'm scared that taking them out of sports is the wrong thing. So I'm never forceful about like, we definitely got to stop doing sports. But I am concerned that like, I would like to have less of that, less rushing around to places, less sitting at fields and sports arenas, and more time to, sit and have a conversation of a judgment-free family zone. And she completely disagrees. She thinks it's very healthy to always be in sports. And I sent her some like research that talks about kids being overly into activities that might be adverse to their health. She's like, oh, that's when you're talking about a kid being in, 16 different activities and all that. And I'm like, yeah, that's 1 kid, right? We have 5. But to me, my answer is this. It's obviously an issue if it's a fucking issue to me, right? We don't need research to prove this. Like if it's adversely affecting my health because it's too much, there's a fucking issue, whether you believe it's good or bad for them. Like it's an issue for our family because it's too much for me. And when is too much, right? When is there not enough time to just be? When are we human doings and not human beings anymore? And I struggle with that. And I know you are a definite fan of having your kids in some sports. And so I want to hear your take on it because it's easy to just discount my wife. I won't discount you quite as simply, I think.
Okay, yeah. So I've thought a lot about that. My general overall theory on kids with my children is they didn't ask to be here. They didn't ask for me as parents. I wanted them, or at least made the choices to bring them into this world.
Right.
So I owe them. They don't owe me anything. That's just a general, I don't know if it's right or wrong. That's just always been my take on it. So I feel an obligation to give them the best possible life and opportunity and those things as I can. My wife and I have been around about that stuff too. I personally am a big fan of sports, specifically for the physical activity, the team building. There's a lot of value in it. I don't force them to do it. I allow them to pick and choose what they want to do. But again, it's experiences of life. We've done everything I think you can do with kids: gymnastics and horseback riding and baseball and soccer and, just every activity. I always bring them up. Hey, you can do this. Hey, you can do that. Check out flag football, whatever. And I'm always bringing up stuff for them to try and check out, because I always sort of in the back of my mind, I always hope they're going to do that one thing that they're going to love. They're going to find out what it is. Who knows? Archery, whatever. They're going to find it. They're going to be like, man, this brings me immense joy and immense happiness, and I love it. And I want to support them in that. I want to be there for them in that. My wife and I are very different. I'm the one I'm at everything they ever do. I don't miss activities, practices, events, whatever. I've been to almost all of them. I've missed very few in my life. And to me, it's more letting them know that I support them in the things that they want to do and what they're interested in, and that I'm on team whatever kid it is, even if it's stuff I don't want to do. I will say, now that they're getting a little older, and this would be kind of whatever, my suggestion to you is sit down and talk to them. Ask them if they could, do you care? Is it important to you that I'm at every game? Because with my schedule and stuff, it's pretty hard. And if it's really important to you, I will definitely make an effort to be there. But you might find out they'll go, no, I don't really care. You don't have to come. We're having just as much fun with you there as if you're not there. So, in fact, we don't even like you being there. Who knows what they're going to say if you ask them that. And that may give you personally some freedom to make choices of what you want to do with your time.
I did something along those lines. Not really that I asked them so much. My one daughter of the twins, my one daughter always tells me she doesn't care if I'm there or not. And I almost feel like she goes so out of her way to say it, it really feels like a defense mechanism. And so I really have a hard time trusting the information. But even if I did trust it, my other daughter's like, no, man, I really like when you're there. So it wouldn't matter. But this season in particular, I had something to do Saturday mornings. I could not see either of my son's soccer games for the entire season. I did take one Saturday off to make sure that I got to see a piece of each game, right? I saw the first half of one boy's game, and the second half of the others. But the 10-year-old told me many times, man, why can't you come to my game this morning? And it's like, I just can't. And I didn't feel guilty about it. I couldn't, right? I had something else going on. But I just get so overwhelmed by it. And I heard what you said that made me, I liked what you said. The only thing that popped a question in my head was you said, you brought them in, you want to do what's best for them. They don't owe you. And I believe that to some extent. But then you said you want to do what's best for them. And that's where I always have my questions. Like, what is best for my kids, right? I can easily justify whatever I want to say is best for them. Is it best that I keep them busy at all hours of their life? Like, part of me says yes, right? That keeps them busy and away from boredom and drug use, right? Which is something I would love to do, keep them away from that. I think that's important. I think that could be useful. The other part of me says, man, am I setting them up for a really fucking miserable life later because they think this is what life is? And then I finally send them out to the world, to college or something where there's not sporting events and practices and shit all the time. And then they find drugs and alcohol because, the shock to their system of what do I do now? I'm sitting here doing nothing. I used to always do stuff all the time. I don't know. I think there's value in sitting still. I think there's value in spending time together. And I don't feel like as a family we do enough of that. I mean, we generally eat dinners together, right? We do some things that are out of practice in parts of, the US, but I don't know. Like, I feel like we run around a lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot of going here and there. It's like,
And I've heard some of that too. My nature is to want to go and do stuff all the time, so it doesn't bother me at all. I
right,
don't mind. But that's just who I like. If I'm sitting around on the couch watching television, I feel like I'm just wasting time. Like, I got a limited amount of time on this planet. I want to try to use it doing shit, like
right.
that's just my take on stuff. And I'm always high energy. Couple of things. One, when I think about my kids, I think I only get this amount of quality time with them for a very limited amount of time. I mean, 18 years sounds like a long time, but I've been in recovery longer than that. And that feels like the blink of an eye. It's like, wow,
Right.
man, it goes so quick. And, not that I'm necessarily going to be out of their life, but like with my 17-year-old now, she drives. So she's taking herself everywhere and going to work and drives to school. And she doesn't really need me to do a lot for her. She's becoming pretty independent. And there's ways that I'm proud of that. And then there's other ways where I'm kind of like, whoa, she's doing her own thing. Like, she's almost an adult. Like,
Right.
she really doesn't need me anymore. She's getting, and there's a little bit of sadness in that. Like, I'll always be her dad. I think she'll always count on us to be around and help her with things. At least I hope so.
Right.
So yeah, we only get a limited amount, and I've always looked at it, and I've explained this in meetings and stuff to people. Like, I don't, so I have pulled back the amount of service commitments and the amount of activities that I've done in the fellowship and all those amount of meetings that I went to, because I felt an obligation to my kids. And not that I let, them and my family trump my recovery, but it also, like, there needs to be some balance there where I need to be available to my kids and my family. And sometimes that means giving up stuff that I want to do. Like, yeah, it's great to go to 3 meetings a week and go out to dinner after the meeting and go hang out with some friends and do all those things. But when I had really young kids, I gave up a lot of that. I'll say purposefully, like, knowing, like, hey, this isn't forever. In a couple more years, my kids are going to be older. And now we're getting to that side of it now. Like, my kids are older. So I can go out to more meetings, and I can go to lots of recovery events, and I can go out with my friends and do more things. And I don't feel like that sacrifice, like, I don't regret that sacrifice. Like, I still feel like it was a good sacrifice to make. The last thing I'll say about, that part of my kids, and this is probably the more unpopular version thing that I'm going to say, is that I often have joked about, like, my kids are 17, 14, and 11. I don't know about you. I don't have much in common with a 14-year-old girl. There isn't a lot of conversation topics that we're going to get into, you know what I mean, that are going to
Right.
interest me or probably interest her. I babble on my nonsense about history and weird stuff. Last night I'm talking to her about Oppenheimer and his, his quotes of the Manhattan Project, and she humors me for a couple minutes, but she's not really engaged in the conversation.
Right.
But to me, that's a fascinating conversation, and she's not interested in that in the least. And she's on Tumblr with her friends or whatever, chatting, probably like, my dad is such a dork. But the truth is, I don't have much in common with kids. I'm
Right.
not a kid. I don't relate to the world in that way anymore. So I don't feel an overwhelming obligation to spend all this time with them myself. What I find more exciting, and I think they do too, is we find stuff that we like to do together. We like to do activities together. We do, we'll go out hiking. We'll go out. They're all excited about going skiing this winter. So we'll plan some ski trips, and we'll go out and we'll go skiing together. And it might not necessarily be this Beaver Cleaver quality time thing that they had in the 50s or 60s or whatever. But we go out, we have fun, we go to dinner afterwards, we talk about our day, we talk about how much fun it was, we share life experiences together. And for me, that's important. And I think for them, that's important. So we find these areas where we all enjoy doing the same things, and we go out and live and enjoy life together.
Well, and I think you've brought up some of my main issues with what's going on, or with the sports and activities, when you said the word balance, right? That's what I feel like is completely missing. And you know, I wasn't the one, because I had so much else going on. I was not the one taking them to these practices during the week. I wasn't at the games on Saturday mornings. I was getting out of my field placement Saturdays after being there for 6 hours and going and sitting at a softball field for 5.5 hours, which was just more than I really wanted to do, for sure. But what I look at, and I've said this to my wife, is that, like, okay, we've got 2 weeks worth of laundry in baskets that we haven't put away yet. I've been wanting to, like, vacuum the floor for a month now. The bathroom hasn't been cleaned for a couple weeks. We're not taking care of the shit we need to take care of around the house, because her argument is, I don't like sitting at home, right? I don't like being at home. I like doing these things with the kids. I like going out of the house and doing things. And I'm like, that's great, but we're not taking care of our fucking responsibilities because we're never here and don't have time to do it, right? So if we're running so much around that we can't actually take care of the household life and keep up with that, and chores and things that we want to do. I want to vacuum the fucking floor. I don't like a messy floor, right? If we can't even do that, like, maybe there's an issue with this. You tied into it with talking about doing activities with your kids. I also like that. I love taking a hike. This is a great hiking weather right now. I like even going to a mall and just kind of window shopping once in a while and doing other random activities with my family, right? And I feel like there's never time to do that because we're always at a goddamn commitment. We're always at a softball game, soccer game, practice, some way, shape, or form. And when we're there, I'm not spending time with them. I'm sitting there watching them, which is fine. Like, I do enjoy a lot of that. I enjoy their softball games. They're at an age now where it's kind of competitive and it's like watching a game, right? But I don't want to feel like there's never a time to do these other things as an actual family. A lot of times we're like, well, we're going to be at the field for 5 hours watching softball. We'll leave the other 2 kids home. Well, okay, so now I don't even have my whole family with me, right? And I get it. It's boring for a 5 and a 10-year-old boy to sit at a field for 5.5 hours. It's awful. I wouldn't want to put them through that. But when do we have the time to clean our house, to take stock of our groceries and get rid of the stuff that's expired and go on hikes and, find every once in a great while, I have a free weekend and I'm like, ooh, I'll go and see what kind of events are in the area. What's coming up? Is there a cool fair we can go to or something? I don't even feel like I get to look for that most of the time because I'm so busy figuring out how am I going to get to this practice or game or whatever. Like, I want more of the other stuff.
So, and you reminded me of this, and I'm like, yeah, that is true. I have, for different reasons, we have put limits on things. And actually, I was thinking, yeah, we actually have. Sometimes they've been monetary limits because a lot of these extracurricular activities cost a lot of money. They're expensive. Right. And so we've said, hey, you have to make a choice. Sometimes it's been time-wise commitments. But yeah, we have put limits on. You can't do this, this, and this. You got to pick, one at a time because we have a family, because we have, there's 5 of us and we all have stuff we want to do. And so we got to balance that out.
Right.
So we have put limits on things. There was something else I was going to talk about there and I forget about what it was. That's okay.
I feel like we had a limit of 1 sport per kid per season, which is still a little overwhelming with 4 of them playing right now. But we don't even stick to it because now there's sports in school and it's like, well, you could be on the school team and this. And now, like, my one daughter coming up for the next season, and I think I said no and we're not doing it, I hope. But apparently there was like school basketball, rec basketball, and some other girl on her softball team wanted her to play on the club basketball. And I'm like, really? 3? I thought we set this 1 per kid limit, and here we are. And I just don't know, man.
And maybe talking about some of that with them, saying, hey, look, you want to commit to all 3 of these. If you're going to make that commitment, I'm going to commit to this one. I'll get you to this one. I'll get you back. I'll worry about that. these are again, it's just teaching them lessons. Like, you want to commit to all these things. Okay. How are you getting to practices? How are you getting home? Do you have supports? Can people help you? Is somebody going to be able to give you a ride? Is this girl going to be able to pick you up every week? And then of course things will happen and that'll fall through and you'll end up picking up in areas where you need, but it's just allowing them to make some choices for themselves. Like, say my 17-year-old's working all the time. Now we got her a car. She worked 6 days last week. She's in school and worked 6 days. I'm like, are you sure that's healthy? Like, you need to learn to balance. Like, maybe you need to talk to your work and tell them that's a lot, like you can't do that. So having some of those, giving them the freedom to, like, oh, you want to make these commitments, you have some obligation in these commitments too. Like, I'm not committing to these 3 things. I'm committing to this one thing. You can commit to these other things.
Right. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we are in a situation, we have very helpful grandparents that will take them to places. I hate when they do it, not because I hate that they help. I just don't want to put them out more than they already assist. So we do have that in place, and I feel like that's maybe taken advantage of. I don't know. I definitely, this entire podcast, I feel like 2 days ago, I was thinking maybe I need to start therapy again. And now I feel like we've been sitting here and I'm like just running by all my problems while we're talking about this. And I'm sure, when my wife listens, we'll lose our only faithful listener because I bitched about her.
Well, and speaking about therapy, I was thinking of this, and that's what I wanted to say earlier, and I forgot. So I'm going to say it now. It's like, how many kids have you, or I know you're limited in your therapy practice yet, but how many kids or family members or adults you think are in therapy because there was some clothes in a basket in the living room, or the bathroom was a little dirty, or, dinner was a little late? Like, those aren't the things that end up putting people in therapy. What ends up putting people in therapy is, I didn't feel like my parents loved me. I didn't feel appreciated. I didn't feel like the things that I wanted mattered. Those are the things that, and maybe I'm saying that as a justification because I got clothes piled up on my, dresser that aren't put away. They're sitting there in a pile all folded, and I need to hang up my work stuff and put my clothes away, and I haven't. So maybe I'm just justifying my own stuff. But I don't think those, at the end of the day, it's like what really matters, and it's that our kids feel loved and supported, and that what they want to do and need to do matters. But don't necessarily put all that on. They are older now, your 14-year-olds. They can start making some choices for themselves and, realize, hey, all right, you want to make all these commitments. This is what comes with it. If you can't uphold your end of the bargain, then you can't do it.
Right. Yeah, no, I do. And no, I mean, I don't think unfolded clothes sends people to therapy later in their life. I do think people's early life experiences are probably exacerbated by their inability to feel like they can keep up with life frequently. Like, that's very anxiety producing later in life and draws up those childhood experiences. So I will say that kind of stuff's going to send me to therapy. Right. But yeah, I do. I hope they know I love them. I struggle sometimes. My 10-year-old boy, I feel like he's constantly on Xbox, and I know that's what 10-year-olds do, but it's like, man, I try to pull him aside at times and just be like, dude, I know, like, you're not available to talk too much, but I do like talking to you, and I love you. And whenever he does ask me to do something, I really try to, even when it's not what I want to do. He wanted to go out in the goddamn dark the other night and kick the soccer ball around. I'm like, fine, come on. Like, we'll go get hit in the head with a soccer ball because we can't see it. So, I mean, I guess one of the important takeaways, man, recovery has definitely helped me give a fuck. Like, I care. I care that I want to be better. I want to be a good dad. I want to do my best. I want to definitely not be the guy who ends up using again and stealing his kids' fucking Christmas presents. And like, I've heard that story and it's tragic. And I would be that guy if I use, right? But even without using, I can still be a jerk and uncaring. But I don't. I want to care. I want to be here today and be valuable and important and guide them healthily. So thank you, recovery, for that, right? If nothing else.
Yeah. And I will say, and just to actually agree with your point a little bit. I have heard our society is really bad at feeling some obligation to keep our kids entertained and amused at all hours of the day anymore.
That's right, Steve Jobs, right?
That it's our job, yeah, and we shouldn't have to do that. Like that actually can kill like creativity and imagination and those things. So sometimes some downtime and boredom, quote unquote,
Right.
boredom time can inspire them to be greater people.
I think I read that Steve Jobs wouldn't let his kids have iPads because he said the distraction took away from the boredom time, and the boredom time was where iPads got invented in the first place. He's like, that's where all creation comes from, is the boredom. So yeah, I don't know. I guess boredom either leads to creation or heroin. It's one of the two.
Right.
I don't know. You got anything else to add this week?
No, I think I'm good. Talked about parenting enough.
Yeah, I guess that'll be
Yeah, for
the
this
topic.
Yeah.
Parenting, sort of.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. As always, feel free to leave a message if you're on Anchor or can get to Anchor, or you can now reach out to us on Twitter, of course, with @recovery_of, or you can email us. It's recoverysortof@gmail.com. I hope everybody has a great week. So that wraps up this week's episode. As always, feel free to join the conversation. If you're on Anchor, you can just leave a message in voice or text form. If you're on another service and can't get to the Anchor app to listen, you're welcome to email at recoverysortof@gmail.com. Recovery sort of is all one word, and I hope everyone has a great week.